Paltrocast.
Well, Alex, thank you for taking the time. Been aware of you. It's painful to say for over 20 years,
Yeah,
but
that's painful, all right.
it's great to see the Damwells back. How long did you have to keep it a secret that the Damwells are coming back?
That's a good question. It was the brainchild of Stephen Terry, the drummer, to start making music again. I think he's just perpetually excited about playing music, as we all are, but I think he's still got that like little boy excitement that maybe we're all missing. So once he and I decided that we were going to do that, um, I think it was, just kind of keeping it between friends and the band's wives and people like that. But we didn't really tell anybody until we were ready to release the first single, which was about a year ago,
Mhm.
Without a Heart. So yeah, I guess it was sort of an accidental secret, you know?
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing where it's indie in some way, but because of your success as a co-writer, you have Morgan Wade on it. So it's kind of like it's mainstream but indie at the same time, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think
So
we've kind of always been struggling with that, with that.
yeah, I mean, it speaks to your credits as a writer and outside contributor. I mean, you've worked with some of my favorite artists. You're one of the on the short list of people who worked with Bunny Carlos, to say the least. So I
hmm
know influences are in the right place and all that. But when did you kind of realize that the co-writing thing wasn't just a one-off session, that it was going to be a long-term thing for you?
Um, it kind of happened accidentally. I became actually this a good friend of mine, Cheyenne, was dating this guy, Chris, who worked at a record label. I mean, it's like one of those stories, like a guy, a
Mhm.
friend of a friend, and he was a fan of my band, and he suggested that I maybe join in some co-writes. And one of the first things I did was with the Chicks, then called the Dixie Chicks,
Yeah.
um, which then turned into some songs on a record that they did called Courtyard Hounds. And then that kind of like propelled me, I think, from, the entry level co-writing to more established artists. So when I came back from this Chicks writing camp, I went right into a writing camp for Justin Bieber, and the song that we wrote was cut by Bieber. And so it kind of happened pretty quickly. As far as like when I knew that it was something that I was going to be doing, I've never really been one to say, I'm going to go do something.
Hmm.
I was always more cautious, I think, in the way that I saw my future or my career, where I would leave a bunch of options on the table, and kind of say, well, whichever one of these works out will be fine with me. So co-writing, producing records, um, playing in bands, running an independent record label. These were all things that I thought would be fun to do, I guess, or that I was passionate about, including writing prose. Went to graduate school and got an MFA in writing.
Yes.
So I just kind of like allow for things to just inch towards, what would be destiny, I guess. And then when they don't work out anymore, it doesn't feel so bad because there's a bunch of other things kind of in the works.
That makes sense. So are you the kind of writer, because of all those outside projects, that is writing every day or almost every day?
No, in fact, I barely write music at all unless it's
Oh,
specifically for a project. Um, I spend most of my time working with other artists, producing records for them and mixing records. So I don't really spend a lot of time just sitting and writing music, like I said, unless it's specifically for like a Damos record or with one of the other projects that I work on, like Broken Baby or something like that, or a solo record.
mhm.
I spend most of my time, working for other people and then writing, reading, and just kind of being alive, trying to enjoy myself.
Good to hear that. But a follow-up hack question for you,
hmm
because a lot of people from your class of pianos, Luna Lounge, Lower East Side venues that are no longer here, etc., um, have gone into co-writing and working with younger artists. And I find that a lot of them are really good at channeling the energy or the scenario that the artist is in. And in other words, providing the input to help them finish the song. You've obviously excelled at that. But what did that do to your Damwell's writing approach?
That's a good question. At first, I thought it made it better. Um, we made a self-titled record in 2015 that was right in the middle of like a lot of co-writing that I was doing, and that record was much maligned. And I don't know if it was
Not by
because
me, for the record.
I appreciate that. I don't know if that was because it just objectively was not as good, or maybe we were swinging for the fences. I mean, who knows? Bands are interesting things. It's like you can be the biggest fan of a band. I mean, go to every show, posters on the wall, t-shirts, with moth holes in them, dating
Yeah.
back decades when you bought them at the merch counter. And then they can put out a new record and you can just throw all that stuff out the window because you feel like you've been totally betrayed. I mean, bands are just mercurial. They're like trying to chase sometimes something that they've done in the past or what the expectations are of them from an audience. And so in the middle of being a like fully engrossed co-writer, I made this Damnwells record that was kind of like, wasn't really well received. So I so up until that point, I thought that co-writing made me a better writer. And then I wasn't so sure. So then I kind of went back after that. I made a couple solo records and just kind of explored more um, the kind of writing that I feel like was more natural to me, and
Yeah.
learning how to be a better producer and learning how to arrange better. So I think that in totality, being a co-writer just kind of made me more disciplined as a writer. I could go into a room with nothing and walk out with a song. When I was in graduate school, it was the same thing. I had to deliver something by Friday, so on Monday I had to sit down and get it started. Discipline is the only thing I think that separates people who are successful from people who are, trying and failing. So I guess what co-writing really taught me and how it shaped me as a writer for myself was just the ability to sit down and do it until it was completed, whether it was good or not.
Got it. Now, when I first became aware of your band, they were using the power pop tag. These days, you never hear power
Mm,
pop.
right.
And the more people I speak with who have been categorized as power pop, the more people I know who hate that categorization and all that. But the more power pop people I speak to, I find out that it all kind of started with Kiss and Van Halen. Were you one of those hard rock people and classic rock people originally?
No, I never really was. I mean, I didn't really start to appreciate Kiss until like I was in my 20s. Um, I was, I grew up in a household of almost exclusively women. My parents got divorced when I was about 8 years old. I'd go to visit my father on weekends sometimes, but it was really my sister and my mother and I, and they were, I mean, not to be totally misogynistic, but they were like into more sensitive singer-songwritery stuff, and I think that
Sure.
that had a big impression on me. I mean, my mother was a huge fan of like Toad the Wet Sprocket and other bands from the 90s that my sister was like a big Chili Peppers fan, Pearl Jam fan, and of course the Replacements, which I think was where we all found common ground. To me, that the Replacements were, edgy and tough enough that as like a 15-year-old or a 13-year-old who was exploring my masculinity and femininity and my place in the world, I
Mhm.
feel like we all had common ground, because we could listen to Here Comes a Regular and then listen to something like
Bastards
what's
so
a
young?
yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So I think that there's that's really where I started to become aware of music that I was really passionate about.
Got it. So it started with accidental power pop, and then it continued with the tag of accidental power pop, and then your co-writing turned into actual pop. That's
Right.
what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And then it went completely backwards, and I started a like an angular punk band called Broken Baby, which is not very very close to pop at all. But I guess it is at times, though.
Fair enough. So are you listening to the same music these days as you were in the early days of the Damnwells?
Probably. I mean, I listen to music very sparingly. I feel like as someone who works in music professionally, um, it's the last thing that I want to do. It's like when a
Yeah.
chef comes home from a day at the
Yes.
kitchen, the last thing they want to do is make a meal. So I try to do other things that are aesthetically pleasing to me, like reading and writing and watching movies or whatever. But when I do listen to music, it always it always goes back to the music that I found exciting. There's this thing I was reading about called neural nostalgia, which is like this idea that you start to build neural pathways, emotional pathways in your brain in like, probably your late teenage years to early 20s, and the connection that you have to music at that time um, creates those emotional pathways, and they're sort of like, I guess you could say they're wrapped in the music you listen to. So I still go back to that music, that nostalgic music. It's very hard for me to like something new. I mean, really hard. I just get bored, and I don't know if it's because it's just not as good or because I'm not as willing to listen to it, but I just find it still exciting to listen to Jim Croce or Bob Dylan or The Replacements or I don't know, any number of jazz records. I still find John Coltrane exciting, and Ornette Coleman exciting, and I still find Tom Waits exciting, and I feel like I discover new things about them every time I listen. So music that bears repeating, or music that bears repeat listening, is music that I tend to go back to.
That's fascinating, but also obviously natural that whatever is your day job, you gravitate towards the exact opposite when you're not working. But hey, I
Yeah.
assume that Cheap Trick is still a favorite band.
Oh God, yes. I have every single Cheap Trick record on vinyl signed by the entire band, which actually took 3 tours to get them to do that, because it was, while they were very accessible and would hang out and like make jokes and stuff, as soon as you're like, "Hey Bunny, will you sign this?" and be like, give me a break. Dad, bother me later.
So are you one of the few people on this earth who's cool with Cheap Trick and Bunny Carlos at this point in time?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I sang on Bunny's solo record, Welcome to
Yes.
Bunnyzuela. And I just wished Robin Zander a happy birthday over text a couple of months ago. So yeah, everything seems to be fine. They're also cool with each other now, I believe. So, I don't know. I try not to get involved in too much of that drama, but it sure is fun to watch.
It is. I mean, most of my favorite bands of all time kind of hated each other. And if they did make up, they didn't tell us they made up.
Right. Right. I
So,
mean, you know, Bunny is an interesting guy because he's just like a huge fan of music. He's almost like a human catalog of forgotten music. A lot of the songs that he did on his solo record were like songs I had never heard of, songs that are not on Spotify, by bands, garage bands that broke up, prior to 1970, you know, and I think that he has a different connection to music than those other guys, and they each have a different connection to music themselves. So I just think that what makes that band interesting, visually, when you're looking at like, In Color or something like that, where you have the
mhm.
juxtaposition of the 2 guys on the motorcycles, and then
Yes.
Bunny
And the other two. Yeah.
and Rick on bicycles. It's really actually indicative of how they are as people as well. There's just something that's like kind of interesting about when you put those different kinds of characters together. And I think that unfortunately, after whatever it is, 40 years, 35 years, sometimes there's problems, but I think they were in it long enough to be able to find a solution. And that's what I think happened.
Well, this is still the Alex and the Damwells interview, but on the
Right.
topic of Cheap Trick, considering how successful Rick has been as a songwriter, it surprised me that he never got into the co-writing game. Yet, again, you and a lot of the people on the Lower East Side bands that at one point in time were signed did. So, in your case, who was the first artist that you really liked that you noticed was doing co-writes?
That's a good question. I mean, probably Tom Petty, I don't know if they're co-writes per se, but Dragging My Heart Around, was a duet, but it's like, I don't know. I think I guess it was more his willingness to collaborate with artists outside of the Heartbreakers that made it interesting in a sort of a co-writing way. Like, and I think just when you listen to Tom Petty, his music is from the perspective of a character that's not him. I mean, sometimes it's definitely from him, and actually profoundly so, when he writes from his perspective, it's very moving. But his ability to sort of like slip into a character, I just always found that to be fascinating. And I think more so than looking at the credits and seeing like, oh, that song was written by, Prince or something like that. It was really Tom Petty's sort of his cast of characters that made me aware that you could write as and for other people.
Well, in the case of Mike Campbell, co-writing on Don Henley songs and that kind of
Right.
thing. So that also speaks to it on that end. And what was the first cut that you had? Was it the first one that you mentioned earlier, or is there a failed attempt before the Chicks?
Oh my God, there was a lot of failed attempts, but there weren't. They were like, I tried to write songs for a number of people, but like I said before, it all kind of happened pretty quickly and dare I say easily, maybe too easily. So when I came back from the Chicks writing camp, I went into a Justin Bieber writing camp, like I said, and that song got cut. So, but after that, there were many attempts to write songs for people that never got cut.
Sure.
So and honestly, I don't really like co-writing. I mean, I like meeting people and collaborating with people. I think that, as I've gotten older, I realized just how important and essential collaboration is to making music. But I don't really like the idea of having to write other people's music, especially when they're not in the room. Like when I wrote the Justin Bieber song, he was not in the room.
Right.
And then it's like that whole process where we write some in the room and then it goes to him. He makes a little couple changes or whatever. But
Change the word, get a third, I think is
right.
the phrasing.
Yes, it is. No, but Bieber actually does write, so
Yes.
that would not be the case for him. But it just was never fascinating to me. It just felt like a totally commodified version of what I loved. But I have made some extraordinarily close friends from co-writing, because I think the nature of writing with other people is very intimate, and you can often kind of skip through the bullshit of, I don't know, of making acquaintances when you just dive in and you're like, so what are we going to write about it? And then you walk out with something that's deeply personal and moving, which is kind of the nature of songs when they're done well. So I like that part of it, but just sort of like looking at the whatever you call it, the requests and being like, oh, so and so needs a song about this. I just think it just was never very interesting to me. So I don't think I was ever really interested in co-writing until someone was interested in me being a co-writer.
Got it. Well, two quick questions, and then I let you go. And the first one, the last one about the co-writing. With the Chicks, Natalie is known to be an obsessed Howard Stern fan. Did that factor into any of your collaborations or conversations?
I never wrote with Natalie. I only wrote with Marty and Emily, because when I was writing for the Chicks, they were still trying to get Natalie back into the fold. So the sisters, Emily and Marty, were like doing these writing camps. And so I did actually meet Natalie later, but so no, I can't speak to that.
So no conversations about high pitch Eric. Okay, got it.
Yeah,
And,
no.
and the last question for you, back to the Damnwells here. New music. Does that mean that we might see gigs in the near future?
We're playing at this place called Racket in New York City on November 14th as kind of like our album release show. Beyond that, we don't really have much more planned. This is a band of families and children and stuff, and it's hard to just pick up and jump in the van like we used to. But if the right opportunity comes along, we'll certainly take a look.
If enough records sell of this new record, then we'll get a tour, correct?
Sure.
Paltrocast.